What is up, Scrub fam? Pat here, back with another video. And if you couldn't tell by the background, we are talking, of course, today about love. And if you could tell that we were talking about love by the background, then please seek help. I'm, of course, talking about the Universe 2 cards, as well as the green cards from Draftbox 5 for our limited review. If you guys missed the red or blue videos, I will link them down in the description below, as always. And as always, we got to thank the sponsor here at 3XG Productions, Alec Pastrana over at beardedcollectibles.com. If you guys have not already purchased Draftbox 5 cards, I believe he is offering the second print run at the end of April. So definitely get those pre-orders in for those. This is a set that you want to try to get cards of for sure. There are so many constructed staples, just like a Draftbox 4. You do not want to be caught sleeping and not being able to afford to play any of the awesome decks going into Series 10. 11 and onwards. So let us jump into the actual review. So first up is Son Goku Spirited Contender. 5 costs 20k to draw 2 cards is not a super great rate. Yes, it does have a cost reduction ability, but it will almost never occur. It is a playable card because it has a decent sized body that will draw us cards. But I don't know if we'll actually be able to get to the late game all too often to be able to play this guy. You really want to be dropping bombs or multiple other things when it is time to play this guy. Still, you know, it does draw cards, so that accounts for something. So I'm going to give Goku a 5. Next up is this other Goku, Son Goku Evening the Odds. There's a 4 cost 15k, which is terrible. You can, of course, when you have no battle cards, pay green and pitch them from your hand to KO anything, which is nice, but it usually only happens in the very early parts of the game, where I feel like just, you know, putting things on board is more useful, or in the late game when you were losing. Still, it is a decent trick, so for that reason I will give it a 5. It is at least playable, and I won't be that upset about putting it in my deck. Next up is yet another Crillon that is super fantastic at lower rarities. He is a 3 cost 15k, which is a fair rate, but he has this really sick ability to choose up to 4 cost worth of battle cards and KO them, so you can get like a 3 drop and a 1 drop, or just a 1/4 drop, or 2 drops. So at worst, Crillon will most likely 1-for-1 with something, but he can actually be a board clear under very specific circumstances, and true to basically, like I said before, most of the other Krillons, he's just a fantastic pickup, and you should basically just snap take him over most other low rarity cards. He is fantastic and one of the best, like, 3rd or 4th picks in most packs. Next up is Rebrand, Avatar of Affection. This card is super pushed, and it does a lot. It just does a lot, man. It carries your opponent's battle cards. It replaces itself with a body if it dies. It protects your life total until they deal with it. And it's got triple strike, which is nuts. There's not much really to say about this card. I normally don't like giving 10s to things that don't just auto win the game, but this card is so pushed that I think that even if your opponent, you don't win with it, it forces your opponent to have the answer. And even if they have the answer, you might have, you know, in your drop area a 4 cost or less threat that will also end the game, you know, shortly after. So I'm going to give Rebrand a low 10. I don't feel like it's a true 10 in comparison. Like, for example, like if this was in the same pack as, you know, Android 17 and I wasn't in a color yet, I would probably consider taking Android 17 because I think he's a better way to end the game. But this card is just really hard to beat. So I wouldn't fault you for taking this card over 17 again. It just really depends. Obviously, most of you guys will just take this in a draft because you just want the super rare that's worth a lot of money. But if you are playing at a high stakes limited tournament where, you know, basically there's more money on the line than what the cost of the card is worth, then that's when you are basically, you know, we're splitting hairs at this point. It's like that's when you really have to ask yourself which one would you really take. Next up is Rebrand Punishing Passion. This card is like $70 USD, so just like we just said with Rebrand, most of you guys will probably just snap up this card if you open it, regardless of what color you're in, because of how much it is. But for those of us who are not trying to money draft, or if you were like, say, drafting her in Cube, or, you know, again, this hypothetical situation where you're at like Nationals or Worlds and drafting for something that's more expensive than a $50 to $70 card, Rebrand is just okay. The 2 cost 15k body, I think, is actually what makes it so that I don't give her like a super terrible grade. Basically, any card that is 2 to 3 cost in Magic, where you have to pay 2 to basically pitch 2 cards from your opponent's hand of their choice, usually doesn't pan out. Yes, hand sizes are low at the beginning of the game in this game, but you're not actually putting anything on the board to pressure your opponent's life total, so eventually they will recoup those cards. It doesn't really have super amazing game impact until the super late game, where players are basically not really dropping battle cards anymore and the game's kind of stalled out. This is a way to break through and win the game. So for that reason, I'm going to give this Rebrand a low 7. I do think it is worth playing this card, but it's not the end-all be-all super rare. Again, most of you guys are just going to snap this card up because it's like a $70 bill in your opinion, or like that's basically what most of you guys are just viewing it as, right? It's a $70 bill, so you will just take it for that reason. Next up is Rebrand Boundless Heart, which I think is probably the second best of the 3 Rebrands in the set. It is a 4-cost 20k with no relevant offensive keywords, but that's okay because it kills anything ignoring barrier. Having a card in your deck, especially one at a lower rarity, which means you might be able to see 1 or 2 of these in a draft, is really nice. It's just a decent sized body that is a catch-all. It will 1-for-1 with anything, and that is great, and you are more than happy to snap these up. Just like Crillon, just, you know, excellent 3rd or 4th pick in most packs, even an excellent 2nd pick in most packs, so I would definitely consider taking Rebrand pretty highly. So she gets the 8 from me. Next up is Brienne Chateau, Dazzling Maiden. This card is honestly kind of a dud, it feels like, for a rare. It is a 4-cost 20k with no offensive keywords. I really wish that this card had like double strike or something to really make me feel like I was getting 4 cost worth of energy out of this card. So 4 cost for a 20k single striker that has a built-in negate where I have to discard a card from my hand, specifically a green card, is not a great investment. Yes, I really like, you know, negates and blockers and things like that, but would you honestly pay 4 energy and discard 2 cards from your hand in order to get a negate? Yes, it does have this ability where if she dies, you get a 3 or less back with its skills negated, which is, you know, nice, but it's honestly, it's a pretty mediocre rare, and I don't think I would take it very highly. In fact, I would probably take a lot of the uncommons like Crillon and Rebrand that we just talked about over this Brienne Chateau. So she gets a 5 from me. Next up is Cocoon, Beastly Maiden. It's snap pick. It doesn't win you the game, but it's a snap pick. It's a negate. It's a removal spell. It's a big body. It's a 9. This card is also super splashable. Notice it's 1 green pip. I don't know why it's done that way. This card honestly should just be green. But I guess they really wanted to push this card and make it like Topo Righteous Aid for some reason. This is basically green's Topo Righteous Aid. As a side note, if you have any interest in playing green, make sure you get 4 of this girl as fast and as early as you can before the price gets any more ridiculous or this set sells out. This is, in my opinion, going to be a green staple in Constructed, and I don't see this card being replaced anytime soon without some serious power creep. Next up is Cocoon, Maiden of Might. This is a 3-cost 15k, which is a rate, but it does have the best keyword in critical, and it replaces itself with a 2-cost beater if it dies somehow. So Cocoon is absolutely excellent for a common, and is one of the best commons in green in the entire set. So for that reason, she gets an 8 from me. Next up is Kakou Maiden Dominance. 2-cost 10k is not super enthusiastic. Yes, it kills a 2 or less, but that scales terribly into the late game, and I like my cards to be relevant at all points in the game. That's why usually 2-cost 15k is the standard, because even in like on turn 5, it is a relevant card that can at least go for game without any other expenditures from my hand. The ability to get a 1-cost or less back when it dies is niche, but not super great. I could see that if your opponent is playing something that is very heavy on aggro, or they're, say, playing the Universe 9 deck where it has a bunch of problematic 2-drops, where Kakou would be much better. So for that reason, I would probably relegate her to sideboard status, so she gets a 4 from me. Next up, we have Rosie Maiden Cunning. This is a 3-cost 15k, which is, again, just an okay rate. When it dies, you get a 2 or less from your drop area with the skills negated, which is nice. And then it has Activate Main. Choose one of your green battle cards with an energy cost of exactly 2. I don't know why it's not 2 or less. And switch it to active mode. So there's very clearly an obvious combo that they want you to play with this card. I am less than enthusiastic about this card. I will jam it, but this is one of the lower end cards, I think, in most packs. You will be taking this towards the end, like, say, 10th or 11th pick most of the time to round out your curve. So you will play it. It's just not very good. So for that reason, I'm going to give Rosie a 5. Next up is the significantly better Rosie Maiden Scorn. This is a 4-cost 20k. When you combo with this card, choose it to one of your opponent's battle cards with an energy cost of 3 or less and KO it. It has 2 combo costs and 10k power. Note that unlike, I should say, Sun Goten, Family of Justice, and many other effects that are like this in the game. This works on both players' turns. So you can use this card defensively, and it is an absolute blowout. Since most commons and uncommons are 3 or less, and most of people's decks, like I would say maybe of their 40 card deck, I would say somewhere around like 28 to 30 cards in their deck are 3 or less. This is basically a blowout most of the time. So I definitely think that you should be playing any copies of this that you can get. I would say probably 2 is probably the absolute maximum I would put in my deck. Sorry, I got tongue-tied there. Obviously, this 2-cost combo power adds up pretty quickly, but this is still a really strong removal spell. Yes, it doesn't deal with bombs, which is why I'm only going to give it a high 7, but I do think it is a very strong common. Next up is Suroas, which is Maiden Augment. It is a 2-cost 10k, so like Son Kakou, not something I'm super enthusiastic about. Has this activate main though that gets around it, makes it a 20k for the turn, and if it dies, you get a 1 or less back from your drop area. There's another green common. It actually might be a green uncommon that we'll talk about later on in this video that I think is a significantly better pickup. This is still better than Son Kakou, but it's not too much better. I think it's a low end 6. It is a 20k attacker. Then of course your opponent will get rid of it, and you don't always have a 1 green cost. It's more likely that you will a 4-drop will die and you have a 3 or less, as opposed to a 2 dying and you have exactly a 1 in your drop area. Next up is Loin, Maiden Supporter. This guy is pretty huge. I kind of wish he had double strike or something like that. 5 cost 30k is great stat line. It's very difficult to block this guy. And when you play him, you get a 4 cost or less green battle card from your hand into play without paying the cost, and you still get the effect, which is really nice. So he combos with some of the other put in plays. So you could play like Loin for 5 and then get like Rebrand. And so you get 2 bodies for 5 energy, which is nuts. And then he has the ability to KO him to negate an attack on your opponent's turn, and then when that happens, he gets a 4 or less green back from your drop area with the skills negated, which is really good. Also, this card is just a really solid super rare. It doesn't really win you the game, but it just has so much value packed into it for 5 energy that it's hard for me to not give it a solid 8 and tell you to pick it up in your packs. Next up is another Loin, Love's Guardian. It's a 2-cost 15k. When it comes into play, it kills something that is a 3 or less. Again, good stat line for a 2-drop, and it kills 3 or less, which is a lot of things in the format, and you can't really deck out with this card because, again, those are the current rules for limited play. So for that reason, I'm going to give Loin a solid 7. It is a decent common pickup, and I would definitely take these in the middle of the pack most of the time. Next up is Czar Berto, Maiden Avenger. This is a 4-cost 15k blocker with Revenge. It is got this auto. When it dies, you get a 3 or less back. Revenge blockers are really strong and limited. I don't feel super enthusiastic about paying 4 for this guy, but he does replace himself with a 3 or less. So there are other cards, such as one of the ones we'll talk about later, where you can get like a blocker off of this, and you can get a 2 for 1, which makes him really nice. You kind of have to build around Czar Berto, I think, a little bit better, or a little bit more, I should say, than some of the other cards in this theme. You really need to make sure that your deck is able to support him so that you can get a lot of value plays out of him, again, specifically with the 1-drop blocker that we'll be talking about in a second. So there are definitely really good plays with Czar Berto. He's just standalone not as insane as some of the other cards. So for that reason, I'm going to give him a low 7. It is a strong blocker, and I would advocate taking 1 or 2 of these in most of my packs. Or in my decks if I can get them. But again, you can't just throw them in there without having something else like that really makes it worth it. You really want to try and make sure you get a combo, like I said, with the 1-drop blocker that we'll talk about in a sec. So next up we have Czar Berto, Heroic Stance. 1 cost 5k. Obviously it's a Saiyan combo. You take a life and he gets double strike and 10k for the turn. This is better as a finisher than it is on turn 1. Accessing your life early is great. The thing is though that most of the time in limited, with the fact that these leaders have critical on the front, it's usually a war over not taking critical damage. So giving your opponent 2 cards from their life for the 1 you are taking is usually not super worth it. They will win the resources game, so it kind of helps them out. So for that reason, I'm going to give Czar Berto a low 7. It's still hard to say no to a 1-cost 15k double striker at any point in the game if you really need it in a hurry. But again, he's not as good as, say, like Intensifying Power Trunks is, or Newfound Power Son Gohan was in the previous draft box. Next up is Rebrand, Maiden Devotee. This is a really, really good rare. That's 4 cost 20k. Again, no keywords. Gets a 3 or less if it dies. The best part about it, though, is that it pitches 2 from your opponent's hand. I know how we said, you know, if your opponent gets the choice to pitch 2, it's not super great, like Rebrand with the super rare. Here's the thing. Rebrand doesn't contribute really anything to the board for the 2 cost investment. Rebrand does, though. It puts a decent sized body on the board that will replace itself. And even when you think about it in terms of energy cost, you pay 2 for Punishing Passion and then 2 for the warp effect, and you get basically for your 4 energy, you are getting a 15k attacker and 2 cards out of your opponent's hand. For Rebrand, you get a 20k attacker, 2 cards out of your opponent's hand, and you get a 3-drop on top of that. So you get 7 cost worth of battle cards and the 2 cards plus the extra 5k. That's, I think, further drives home the point of why I think Punishing Passion is not super, super great. So I'm going to give Rebrand an 8. It is a solid rare and definitely one you should definitely pick up. So next up is the other Rebrand, Love's Guardian. This is what we were just talking about with Czar Berto, the Revenge blocker. If you have a couple of these in the deck with Czar Berto, I think its value is a lot higher. So yeah, again, as always with most of the blockers, low 7, you know, just really good. You want these to protect your life total. Never not happy to see this card. Speaking of cards I'm never not happy to see, Njemanze is a 30k vanilla. You guys already know how we do those. That is an 8 from me. They are just too difficult to block, especially in a format with, you know, not too many negates. There are a lot of blockers, obviously, but not a ton of negates, I should say, and there are obviously no super combos and no Deluge of Powers to really block this or get this off the board easily. He's almost always going to be a 4 for 1. Next up is Vikal. This is the one we were talking about when we talked about Suroas. This is a 2 cost 20k that is a common. I just want to make sure that it was a common. I remember that, what was his name? Limo was the 2 cost 20k in Dropbox 4, and he was an uncommon, so realistically you only got 1 of those in the draft. Vikal being a 2 cost 20k, a common means that she's almost always the correct pick over Suroas in almost every scenario, and is one of the best 2-drops that you can pick up. So I'm going to give it an 8 just simply because of the absolutely busted stat line for turn 2. Again, this is going to basically mandate 2 cards out of your opponent's hand every time this swings, or your opponent is taking a damage, and this adds up pretty quickly for such a low investment. Next up is a deceptively good card, which is Prom, Reflective Fighter. He has a 1 cost 5k. When you combo him from your battle area, you draw 1 card. So I say deceptively good because, again, the early game is fought over things that, you know, trying to maintain your life total high while forcing your opponent down with your leader through crit. So Prom will basically reimburse himself. You will play him for 1, and then your opponent will attack. You will combo Prom defensively off the board to recoup the card that you spent from Prom, and you will keep your life total high. Usually the person who awakens first in these draft box formats with these critical on the front leaders is the one that's going to end up losing the game. I would say maybe like something like 6 or 7 times out of 10. So you definitely want to be in that scenario where you are being the second one to awaken, and Prom helps you do that quite a bit. So that way I value him quite highly. I'm going to give him an 8. One of the things I really learned from playing a lot of Dropbox 4 is that cards like Dende, Cry of the Soul, even if they are, you know, mediocre effects, they do cantrip, and that is way more important when the leader has critical than in other formats where you have a traditional leader. Next up is Hermia, Pinpoint Accuracy. It's a 1 cost 5k. If you have another green battle card, when you play this card, you get to KO it 2 or less. Look, guys, this is just not good. Like, you have to have 2 guys on board. It's almost just not worth it. And this card's an uncommon as well. I would just avoid this card. It's really not super great. I would give it a 3. It's basically, if you were just desperate and you're playing against like 2-drop doggo deck, then maybe it might actually get there, but otherwise, no. Next up is Pell, Confident Supremacy. It's a 3 cost 15k. Fair stat line. The best part about this card, though, is when you play it, you get a 3-drop or less that is green from your drop area with its skills negated. So if you have, you know, this guy come down for 3 and you have another 3-drop that you set up earlier through combos or whatever have you, then you will get this guy, get that on board as well. So being able to get like this and then like say, you know, Vikal for 3 energy is kind of insane. and it will let you basically just smash your opponent into oblivion with the tempo advantage that he is gaining you. So yeah, Pell, super good. So I'm going to give him an 8. Next up is Ganas Aerial Assault, 6 cost for 30k. KOs anything ignoring barrier, which is nice, and your opponent discards 2 cards from your hand, which is again also nice, but it costs 6, and it doesn't do anywhere near as much as Master Roshi or a lot of the other super rare bombs. So I'm not super sold on this. The effect is powerful, and the stat line is huge, but again, it's really slow, and I think games might end before you get there. Still, solid pickup for those games where against good players where it might drag on a bit long, so I will give Ganas a solid 7. Next up is Ogma, Compassionate Supremacy. It is a 3-cost 10k blocker. When you KO one of your opponent's cards, if this card isn't in play, you get to play it for free. Again, just like with other blockers, you know, I'm going to obviously give this guy an inflated score. 3 cost for 10k is whatever. I wouldn't even want to pay 3 cost for a 10k blocker, but it is pretty easy in green to set this card up as a free blocker or a free way to pressure your opponent. So that is worth, you know, something. So I'm going to give him a low 7. Next up is Topo Righteous Reprisal. This is not as good as Topo Righteous Aid, but it is a 2-cost 15k that kills a 2 or less. So it is a negate, it is a relevant statted body, and in some matchups it's really good against yellow, for example, and blue has a ton of 2-drop 15ks as well. So Topo is got a lot of targets that he can hit, and unlike the bad stat line on Kakou, this guy actually has a relevant stat line that can pressure in the late game, and he's just all around a solid card. So for that reason, I'm going to give him probably, I would say, high 7 to low 8. I think it's probably closer to say an 8 simply because he is a negate, and I value those pretty highly. You never know when a negate can save you and buy you another turn. Next up is Hasty Dispatch Dispo. It is a 1-cost 5k. Obviously, if you have no battle cards in play, you can remove it from your discard pile to play a 1-drop. This feels more like a constructed card. I don't really feel like there's too many combos that you want to be using this with in draft blocks. Perhaps getting back a Prom, for example, might be pretty cool. But, you know, the combos I feel like are just few and far between. I'm going to give Hasty Dispatch Dispo somewhere between a 3 and a 4. I just really don't think that you want to be jamming this card too much in your decks. You know, actually, you know what? On second thought, let's probably say it's like closer to like a 5, and that's only because it can recycle cantrips, which is kind of important, like I stressed earlier in the video. If you're using it for that reason, I can see it being a little bit better, but it's not a super high pick. I would probably take it towards the latter, the end of the pack if it's still in the pack. I think there are many other commons and uncommons you could take over Dispo. Next up is Heaven's Hull. It is a 1-cost counterattack that is a negate, obviously. Then you can KO negate one of your opponent's battle card skills, negate it, KO that battle card, then KO cards equal to or less than the cost of your KO'd battle card. So yeah, it's basically a negate and a removal spell in one. Obviously, you have to sack one of your guys, and then obviously you're negating the skill, so you can't even capitalize off of many of the when dies triggers on a lot of the green battle cards in the set, which is really unfortunate. I guess they realize it might be super busted with like Rebrand or with Cocoon or some of these other characters. So it is what it is. It's still a negate, and it does have the upside of being removal. I do think that this card is better than the 2 blue negates that I gave an 8 to in the previous video, which is Dirty Burst and then the Weesis Coercion. But it is not better, I think, than getting a body on board and stacking your opponent's deck with a negate. This card situationally is a blowout, but more often than not, I feel like it won't be. Still, negate's a negate, so it gets an 8 from me. Then we have Heart Arrow of Love. It is a 1-cost activate battle to give either your leader or a battle card 10k power for the turn, and if it's your turn, you choose 2 of your opponent's battle cards with that cost 3 or less and KO them. This is a great combat trick, and it's kind of a blowout. It's unfortunate that it doesn't work on your opponent's turn. Still, I would take this and be happy with it in most green decks, so it's going to get a 7 from me. Next up, we have Universe 2 Assemble. It's a 1-cost cantrip. Putting any Universe 2 card from your deck in your drop area it's kind of whatever. I mean, it's cool that it can set up late game stuff. Like if your Cocoon dies, you can get a 2-drop, which is really cool. But honestly, I think I'd rather leave most of my cards in the deck until, like, say later on in the game where I'm just deck thinning and trying to find my bombs. So for that, reason, when I play it in the later parts of the game, it might be worth it. You are going to play this card in almost every deck that you get it in that's green, because it is a 1-for-1. You are paying 1 energy on 1 card to get 1 card back, which is nice. And then obviously you get a little bit of deck thinning. So every green deck will want this. It's just that it's not as impactful or as good as many of the other cards in the set that are green. So for that reason, I'm going to give this a 5. It is a playable. You will almost always play it, but you don't want to prioritize it over better cards. It's very similar to like how people used to take super combos before prioritizing actual good cards in the pack, so that way when they would draw with super combos, they're not drawing any good cards. Think of it like that. Next up is Heavy Light Shatter Burst. This is basically the poor man's 5-drop rebrand. It kills all of your opponent's battle cards, and that's it. It has no combo power. I really wish this card had the Activate Battle that like ceased to exist and the other cycle from Series 9 had, to give this some combo power, so it's some use. Paying 5 for this feels super terrible. And because it has no combo power, it just rots in your hand for days. I really don't like this card at all. It's basically a sideboard card against decks that are trying to be like Mimi and stall out the game forever, such as the green deck from Dropbox 4. It just gets tons of 10Ks and you can never kill it. This is something that you can side in for them. I guess red with, what's his name? The Fox, 3-drop Fox that gets back two 10Ks every turn. You could bring this in against that deck if they're stalling you out and you are unable to finish them, but otherwise I super don't see this as a main deckable card. And then next up is Big Love, which is a 2-cost activate main. If your leader is green, your opponent can't tackle battle cards that cost 5 or more until the start of your next main phase. As I already said earlier in the video, most of your opponent's deck is going to be 3 or lesses, a couple of 4s, very few 5 or mores, so this card hits basically super rares. What if your opponent didn't open super rares? What if your opponent's super rares are in their life? This card has no combo power. It costs a lot. 2 is asking a lot for this effect also. It's just not good. There are some really niche scenarios I could see it being useful in, so I'm not gonna say it's a 1, so maybe a low 2, but it's pretty down there. This is one of the worst cards in the entire set, so do me a favor and just don't play it. So that's going to be it for the green cards, guys and girls. Again, if you guys enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe. It means a ton to us here at 3HD Productions. And as always, guys, stay safe. Practice your social distancing and all that other stuff. Again, just stay safe. Times are crazy, but hopefully we'll all get through this together. Bye-bye.